Okay, so we are going to start. So hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar titled Why Automated SBOM Generation is Crucial for a Safe Software Supply Chain. My name is Lina Martini, Marketing Executive at Labrador Labs, and I will be today's moderator. I'm excited to be hosting this session and pleased to introduce today's speakers, Janet Worthington, Senior Analyst at Forrester, advising security and risk professional worldwide, Professor Hee-Jo Lee, founder and CEO of Labrador Labs, Jean Park, business lead at Labrador Labs, and Dr. Yoosung Kim, staff product cybersecurity engineer at Intuitive. So before I hand the mic over to our speakers, I have a few housekeeping items to cover for today's webinar. First, today's webinar will be recorded. Once available, we will send you the link to the recorded session. Please feel free to share the link on social media with your colleagues and your network. We will also ensure to share the presentation deck with you. Also, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have a question, feel free to send it through the Q&A button at any time. I will collect all of them to be answered by the end of this session. Please don't choose the chat button as it is disabled. And if we don't get to your question during today's session, we will make sure to follow up afterwards. Finally, if you open the webinar in more than one tab, you may hear an echo, so please make sure you have only one tab open. Also, make sure to have a stable connection as you may have video or audio issues if your connection is spotty. At last, if you have some trouble reading the webinar slides, please extend your screen. And without further ado, let's move on to our speaker's presentation. So let's start with you, Janet, presenting Securing the Software Supply Chain with Software Composition Analysis to show how SBOM is crucial in providing software transparency for a safe supply chain management.
Thanks, Lena. And just gonna get my presentation up here. Can you guys see? One second. Nope. Does this look good to everyone? Great. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Jen, and for having me, and for everybody at Labrador Labs for letting me talk to you all today. So before we dive into exciting world of SBOMs, I just kind of want to set the stage for where we are today with the state of application security. And this also helps us understand where we are with supply chain security. So what we do at Forrester is we want to make sure that we understand what's going on based on data. And so we surveyed security decision makers and asked them to estimate how many times they think that their organization had been breached in the past 12 months. And what we heard was that actually 66%, so a very large number, had been breached at least once. 11% of the respondents said they were breached as much as up to 25 times. And then the 1%ers, and this is the one time you don't want to be a 1%er, is they were breached more than 25 times. So the reality is that you're being attacked all the time, and that sometimes the attackers are able to get in. And so what we want to understand is, for the folks that have been breached, how did it happen, so we can try and prevent that in the future. So we asked them to do an attribution. We said, if you've been breached at least once, tell us how the attacker got in. And we gave them a couple of areas. The first one was, it was an internal incident. A second one was a third-party incident. The third was a lost or stolen asset. And then the fourth one was an external incident. So with the external incidents, we actually, and I should say that external incident was actually the biggest portion of the attribution. So that's how attackers are getting into your systems. And when it came to how the external attack was carried out, what I'd like to point out is the ones that kind of made it to the top. So this year, software vulnerability exploit was number one. And with a lot of the known vulnerabilities that have been out there, that we've seen more being disclosed all the time, we know that a lot of folks are using open source and third-party libraries that haven't been patched. Number two is supply chain or a third-party breach. And where we see that come in is, we've seen a number of suppliers will be attacked, then their applications or their software is then passed along to their customers, and that is used in it, and then their customers become the target of attack. And then the third one here is web application exploits. So your typical SQL injections, cross-site scripting, et cetera, basically OWASP top 10. And I think what's interesting is that web application exploit, I believe, was #1 the year prior to that and the year prior to that. And I think what we're seeing is web application exploits and software vulnerability exploits, both which are really targeting your application layer, continue to be top vectors of attack. And so we want to make sure that, when we are creating software, the software that we sell to others, that we're making sure that we're hardening that software and we have good security practices. And with supply chain breaches, that really means, and we'll talk about this more in this webinar, but understanding what you have across your life cycle and how that all fits in together. So the good news, so that was the not great news. So the good news, though, is that when we ask security decision makers, what are your top initiatives for the next 12 months? The first one on their list was application security capabilities. Now, that's not to say that the other ones on this list, for example, identity and access management tools, strengthening that, better security analytics capabilities. Those are all important. It's just that what security decision makers and professionals have realized is that attackers know what's easy to get to, and it's your application and the application layer. So now let's kind of pivot a little bit to talking a little bit more about where the landscape is of vulnerabilities. So first, open source, right? Open source is great. It allows developers and teams to not have to build everything themselves. They don't have to start from scratch. They can concentrate on the code that they are writing and the business logic. And we've seen open source just explode over the past 5 years. And what we see now is a lot of reports on audited code bases that a majority have open source in them. And of the ones that have open source, a majority of the application is made up of open source. So this means that you are really assembling and packaging more than you're building. But that doesn't come for free, even though a lot of times open source is free. You have to understand the security of that because, again, as we kind of mentioned before, we are seeing a lot more vulnerabilities being disclosed, and the open source vulnerabilities year over year have just kept going up, up, up. And I think, I have to mention Log4j. I think everybody is familiar with it. The whole world went through it last year, trying to remediate it. And, it took a lot of people a long time. And we know that there's still attackers out there that are attacking unpatched third-party systems. And I think what was recently interesting is in the US, the Department of Homeland Security did Cybersecurity Review Board report where they went back and they looked at their handling and their other agencies' handling of Log4j to see what learnings they could get from it. And a couple things stood out. I think the prominent one was that it took one department 33,000 hours to remediate and clean up Log4j. And I think what that shows is just how pervasive that open source libraries are. But I think also that if we don't have good hygiene along the way, the costs are going to be very high. And it's not just the cost to clean up, it's that opportunity cost that you can't be doing something else. And I think the other thing that the report pointed out too is that this is going to be an endemic vulnerability. We are going to be dealing with Log4j for years to come, again, because it is so pervasive across the software supply chain. So Log4j is what we would say is, one of the traditional supply chain threats. We're also seeing emerging supply chain threats. And the reason I say it's traditional is that, you know, attackers have been using known vulnerabilities for years, right? They, as soon as, and we saw this with Log4j, as soon as it was disclosed, you know, attackers started using it and attacking organizations around the globe, because they can automate a lot of that now as well, because everybody is connected and online. But what we're finding is that attackers are moving from being more opportunistic to becoming more aggressive and proactive. And this is where they are getting organizations to download malicious components. And what happens is these malicious components get packaged with your application, with your software, and then your customers download it. And now the attackers have a plethora of great targets for them to attack. And so you're putting your customers at risk. Some of the ones that we've seen, I think probably the most popular one is dependency confusion, where attackers will figure out the name of a package that you use internally. They'll create the same one externally, and without knowing it, your automated pipeline will pull down the latest that it sees, and it pulls down the one that the attacker has put malicious code into. Typo squatting is one where we hear a lot as well, where it does also have the idea where they are creating libraries that are very close in name. So again, as you're being, as a developer, you're super busy, you just pull down the one you think it is, but you're pulling down one that's malicious. And then the last one that we're seeing is vulnerabilities in the development pipeline. I think, for years, we all just built software and we use different tools. Now with the CI/CD tools we have, we can go much faster, we can build quicker, we can deploy quicker, it's great. But these are also now vectors for attack, and the attackers have been figuring this out. So, with this SolarWinds is a great example of that last one. And what we saw last year in the US is that SolarWinds, there was also a Colonial Pipeline attack. There was a number of supply chain incidences that basically led President Biden to say, enough is enough. And he issued an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. And this included making sure that, when agencies are purchasing software, that they understand that supply chain implications from it. And then they look to the people supplying them to make sure that what they're getting isn't going to put the government at risk. And as part of that, the executive order actually tasked NTIA to say, hey, we know that a software bill of materials is a good key component in helping understand what you're getting when you're buying software. Please put out what is the minimum level of guidance when creating a software bill of materials. Now, to kind of take a step back, what is a software bill of materials? Well, medical devices have been using this for many years, but the idea is that it's an ingredient list. It is telling you if you pick up a bag of M&Ms at the store and you turn it over, you will see, everything that's in it. There'll be chocolate, there'll be some artificial stuff that you've never heard before. There may be nuts if you're buying the peanut M&Ms, which are my favorite. But the idea is that you get to see what's in it, and some of the ingredients are made up of multiple other ingredients. And it's important because if you have a nut allergy, you need to make sure that you understand what's going into what you're buying. It's the same idea for software. You need to understand what those ingredients are. And software bills of material have been around for a number of years. The financial industry they have actually adopted it a little bit quicker than others. But I think the good thing about the executive order is it was really saying, hey, we need to make this a part of what when we buy, I should say, from the private sector and anyone for that matter. And so they tasked NTIA with figuring out the minimum figuring out the minimum requirements for a software bill of materials, and we'll talk about that in a second. But recently, I wanted to point out that the Office of Management and Budget for the executive branch recently put out additional guidance that it gave timelines for when agencies, so when government agencies have to start asking suppliers for a self-attestation. And if they want to, depending on the risk level, agencies can ask for more than just a self-attestation, as well as artifacts that demonstrate conformance to a secure software development practice, and that is specifically a software bill of materials. So this is a holistic, this is one way to start thinking about how we can think about ensuring that we know what's in the software that we're building and in the software that we're buying. And the NTIA guidance started by talking about three main areas. The first one is the data fields that go into the software bill of materials. The next one is automation. So, making sure that you can create an SBOM automatically, and that you don't have to do it by hand, and that when you do it, it is in one of three formats, because these are the ones that's going to make it easier for people to read. The format should actually be in both machine readable formats, so somebody could ingest it if they wanted to, and the formats are SPDX and CycloneDX, which are probably the two most popular, and then SWID tags. And then the third thing they talked about was the practices and process in order to define the SBOM and distribute it. The fields themselves, this is again the minimum. We would always tell you to help your supplier by giving more than just the minimum, but the minimum standards is, the name of the supplier, all of the components, the version of those components, and then the dependency relationships with those components. And now it doesn't just stop at your top level dependencies, your direct dependencies. What you really need to do is to make sure that not only are you killing your dependencies, but your transitive dependencies. So in that M&M example, you might have chocolate might be made up of cocoa and milk. You need to make sure that you say chocolate and then those two dependencies, so that you can understand everything in that supply chain. In that software. So that's a lot to do, right? And you may be a supplier to the federal government, and so you need to think about this right away, and you probably are already on it. But you may not be a direct supplier to the federal government. You might say, maybe this doesn't apply to me. Well, if it doesn't apply to you, you might want to just double check and think, and even if it doesn't, you want to start thinking about this now, because one, you could be a supplier to a supplier who supplies the federal government, so that's two down, and yes, you are also impacted by it. Or you just might be, your customers might start asking you for it. We've actually seen at Forrester, we have a number of clients, and they call up and they say, I want to start putting a software bill of materials as part of my contract so we can start understanding what's going on. How do I do that? So we're actually just seeing enterprise to enterprise, more people asking. And so what do you do? How do you do this? First of all, take an inventory of your software supply chain. You need to understand everything that goes into it. And once you do that, what you might want to do is you're going to figure out areas where you're more at risk than others. And certain parts of your supply chain are, are external facing, and you understand that, and those might be the ones you want to focus on first. But you also want to start talking to your suppliers, again, about providing a software bill of materials and a vulnerability report. And vulnerability reports, there is a standard called VEX, which is a little bit newer, but just giving them a vulnerability report from a tool like a software composition analysis starts them being able to figure out what's going on. And you can say, hey, yes, I know this component is being used as the supplier, and there's a vulnerability, known vulnerability, but our software doesn't call into it. So you're being proactive about it. So if you're the purchaser, ask for the SBOM. If you're the supplier, please make sure you have one ready to provide. And then what you'll want to do too is you'll want to make sure that if you're a supplier that you're automating that SBOM generation, so that it's not something that is done at the last minute or as a one-off. You want to do it for the software that you sell, include it into that your CI/CD process. And if you're using open source software, it is up to you to make sure that you understand, and if you need to, create that software bill of materials. Finally, regardless if you're a purchaser, the acquirer, or if you're the supplier, you need to make sure that all the departments within your organization understand what it means to build a secure software supply chain. And while you may be selling software to other people, so you may be the supplier, you are also likely consuming a lot of software as well. So making sure that you have legal, compliance, the security team, development for the software that you sell. You need to make sure everybody is on the same page about what you're going to ask for, how you're going to manage your supply chain. So let's talk a little bit about, if you're a supplier, what you can do in order to build that software bill of materials. Well, software composition analysis is one way. There are other tools out there, but this is probably the most popular tool on the market because it not only automates the generation of software bills of materials, but it can go more. It can tell you for the open source and third-party libraries that you're using and packaging, what are all the components, and if there are any of those components that they link back to the National Vulnerability Database to say, hey, here are where those components have vulnerabilities and the severity levels of those vulnerabilities. A software composition analysis tool can also, with those components, tell you what open source licenses are being used. Your team will want to understand, because using certain open source libraries means that sometimes you have to give that software back, and you need to understand what that means as part of your business strategy. The good thing too is that when you have these software composition analysis tools set up, you can automate them so they're continuously looking for issues. And as we know, new vulnerabilities are being disclosed all the time. You can set policies to say, you know what, we don't want certain components ever to enter our life cycle. We don't want certain licenses to ever be able to be used. We want, if something is, a high severity, we want XYZ to happen. And so this is what these tools do for you. And software composition analysis has been around for many years. I think the executive order with SBOMs did help make it more popular, but it was already on the rise. And what you can see here is, this is what we're talking about, is where people are putting software composition analysis into their supply chains. The light green that you see is people who have adopted software composition analysis and are even could be expanding it as well in their life cycle. And you can see that in development, testing, and production, it's fairly even, the number of people where people are putting it. And we have some putting it in design as well, which is great, because if you're doing it early and you're blocking the bad components from even coming into your system, it makes life much easier instead of having to upgrade later on. When we see people who are planning to adopt, I think this is where we get kind of excited, is that we're seeing a lot of folks thinking about adopting in the design phase, again, which is very important. But the development testing phase are very high numbers. And I think this is important, that you can't just look at software composition analysis or your components at one point in time, because components are always coming into the software development lifecycle. And if we look at production here, the dark green, we have 28% that are planning to adopt. Well, last year it was only 11%. And so people are really seeing the importance of not only doing software composition analysis on the left-hand side, or shifting left, as people like to call it, in the development lifecycle, but also shifting right into production, because new vulnerabilities are being disclosed all the time, and you have to know where you're vulnerable to be able to remediate. And I'm going to use Log4j again. Log4j is a great example, right? As soon as it came out, you needed to know where in production you were vulnerable. And so the last stat that I want to leave you with is that this year we cross-correlated to see organizations that said that they had been breached with how likely they were to adopt or planning to adopt software composition analysis. And 90% of the folks who said they were breached said they were going to be implementing software composition analysis, 15% more than those who hadn't been. And so it's, you don't want to learn the hard way. If you haven't started using a tool like software composition analysis in the code that you sell, in the applications that you build, you need to start doing that. And we would advise to do it throughout the life cycle. So if you don't have a New Year's resolution yet, I know it's a little early, but make this one for 2023. Thanks, Lena.
Okay, Janet, thank you very much for shedding light on the importance of FCA and SBOM for secure software supply chain. So now we are gonna go on to Professor Ijoli's presentation. He's gonna present Labrador Labs, its vision and its ambition to make the software supply chain more secure worldwide.
Hello. My name is Ijoli, CEO and a founding member of Labrador Labs. On behalf of all Labrador members, I would greatly appreciate your participation in this webinar and hope to find many good ideas and collaborate items. Next, let me introduce the company Labrador Labs. Next. One day, someone suggested an idea that if we gather all security checking tools and technology in one place and provide to anybody in the world with an easy-to-use web interface, it will be great. So our joint international project started at year 2015, and we established a research center called CSSA at Korea University, which stands for Center for Software Security and Assurance. The joint research team consists of 4 countries, including CMU, ETH, and Oxford, and now we have more teams. The project was very successful, and we launched a public security analysis platform called IoTcube.net, and it has been evolved a lot after many years. And now we have an enterprise solution called Labrador, which is developed by the professional teams in the spin-off company called the Labrador Labs. We do many collaboration between CSSA and Labrador, as shown in this page, which include technology development and knowledge sharing. Next. For 8 years journey of Labrador history, we have many good feedbacks from experts and enterprise customers. Some of them will share their experience today. Labrador provides accurate detection and easy correction, which gives lots of benefits for open source security and SBOM management. Now, detailed story will be provided by Jin Park, who is in charge of marketing and overseas sales in Labrador Labs. Thank you for your listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Ijoli, for an introduction how the great journey to make the world a safer place with Labrador started. Hi, this is Jin Park, and I'm a business lead at Labrador Labs. At this session, I will introduce challenges of the SCA solutions faced currently on managing SBOM and vulnerability, and how to overcome the challenges with Labrador SS. Ideally, the general SCA solutions can be effectively applied to detect components for the SBOM management and prevent threats arising from open source software reuse. However, identifying open source software components and detecting vulnerabilities correctly are becoming increasingly challenging due to the recent trends in software development practice regarding open source software. According to the CSSA, the biggest obstacle is the modified open source software reuse process. In the case of programming languages widely used in embedded or OT sector, such as C, C++, modified open source software reuse is very prevalent for the purpose of device optimization. Since it is challenging to identify components that only a portion is reused with coding modification, the general SCA solutions generate many false alarms. The right table indicates open source software usage patterns. We can see that only 5% of developers reuse open source without any modification, and 42% of developers take a necessary part of open source, and 27% of developers change the open source code, and 22% of them even change the structure of code for the device optimization. So those false usage patterns are causing the false alarms generation for the general SCA solution. So to solve the challenges of managing SBOM with vulnerabilities properly, today we introduce Labrador solution with its 3-layer analysis. When detecting open source components and finding vulnerabilities, Labrador utilizes the 3-layer analysis technique for more comprehensive and complete detection. The 3-layer analysis technique considers the target software by dividing 3 levels, such as component, file, and function, and detect components and find vulnerabilities at each level and provide an integrated result. So the first component level, Labrador detects SBOM information based on the identified third-party open source components and their versions. Labrador determines whether the identified component versions contain known vulnerabilities by referring to its own vulnerability database. Here, the centrist algorithm, a technique that can precisely identify modified open source component, is leveraged. Next, the file level. Labrador discovers components and vulnerability in the target software by using files as signatures. Therefore, it can find partially reused open source component exactly, and with vulnerable file, which a secret patch is not applied, and a vulnerable code exists. Lastly, the function level. Labrador detects open source components and vulnerabilities by identifying functions that are syntactically similar to each component and the known vulnerable functions. So here, Labrador leverages body algorithm, which can discover vulnerable functions correctly. So with this 3-layer analysis, only Labrador can provide the most accurate SBOM information and broader vulnerability analysis accuracy with patch backporting methods and more. So that's why we recommended Labrador, which is an easy-to-use tool for managing a secure supply chain, software supply chain. Labrador provides software transparency by precisely generating a software bill of material for input software. Moreover, Labrador performed open source software clearing, a task for resolving open source security vulnerabilities and license compliance issues. So it works in 3 steps. So the first step is input. Through cloud or on-premise services, the software source code, G-file, or CLI will be analyzed by the Labrador scanner. And the second step is detect. With the patented technologies, centrist and body algorithms, open source components with vulnerabilities and license violations are detected up to 93% of accuracy. Furthermore, the Labrador engine extracts all the necessary information for an accurate SBOM. And the last step is correct. Through the organization policy management system, open source software vulnerabilities and license issues can be corrected with patch backporting and license management. The generated SBOM can ensure the transparency of supply chains. So for more information of the most innovative and accurate SBOM and vulnerability management solution Labrador, please visit our website, and you can find a various content, including this webinar clip, and also get a chance to experience the Labrador OSS. But before finishing this session, I would like to share how SBOM can be used in securing software supply chain with an example of the medical industry. The medical industry, due to its sensitive nature, has been the first sector to understand the importance of secure software supply chain and the major role that SBOM plays in it. The FDA, along with the IMDRF, which is International Medical Device Regulators Forum, have created and shaped specific recommendations and guidelines to create, distribute, and manage medical SBOM. It defining in great details its life cycle to protect patients against potential harm due to an insecure software supply chain. In the medical SBOM life cycle, 3 parties are involved, which are the FDA, the medical device manufacturer, we will call it MDM, and the healthcare provider, we will call it HCP. The medical SBOM life cycle consists of 5 steps. So the first step is collection and aggregation. This first step consists of having the MDM to collect all the SBOMs for all the components used in the creation of a new medical device. The medical SBOM must include all the components and its dependencies. This collection of SBOM will be aggregated into a software component repository. Once the aggregation is done, the SBOM will then be matched with the CV database to check for any known vulnerabilities. The second step is generation. So once the verification is completed, a medical device SBOM is generated. The generated SBOM must conform to SBOM international standard, as Janet mentioned, SPDX, CycloneDX, and SWID, and be machine readable. The third step is distribution. This document is then followed by 2 distributions. First, it will be distributed to the FDA for the pre-market approval and post-market approval. Then after our pre-market approval, once purchased, the SBOM will be distributed to the HCP. And the fourth step is ingestion. The SBOM is then ingested by the HCP and stored onto its own software component repository, along with other medical device SBOM. And the last step is update and maintenance. This final stage until the end of life or end of support of a component and or the device. The MDM as well as the HCP must update and maintain their SBOM database. In this stage, it is crucial for the MDM and the HCP to have a solid SBOM plus vulnerability management system to keep up to date to zero-day vulnerabilities and changes in code. The SBOM lifecycle follows well the SDLC, as it takes many of the steps for a safe software supply chain management. So this is all that I have prepared for you today, and thank you for listening. Lina, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean, for showing what Labrador can do for SBOM management and secure software supply chain. And also thank you, Professor Lee, for presenting in further detail what Labrador Labs is about. And finally, we have the pleasure to hear more from Dr. Yoo-Seung Kim about his experience using Labrador and for his SBOM and vulnerability management.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me first. Yes, my name is Yoo-Seung Kim. I'm working in a company called Intuitive Surgical. Actually, the company is manufacturing the medical device. So probably some of you already know that Da Vinci, that's the surgical robot used in worldwide. So my role is working for cybersecurity, product cybersecurity in Intuitive. So as Jean pointed out, in dealing with FDA regulation, there are 2 different phases, so pre-market and post-market. So pre-market is talking about like before we release the product to the market, we have to make sure the product itself is security architectured. Also, if there's any known risk and vulnerability, we have to assess it and then reporting to any regulatory office so that gets the approval before we hit the market. So I'm part of a pre-market side. So I'm helping with all the cybersecurity architecture across the company products. And as you may guess easily, for post-market, after we release the product, there are separate security operation team to work on if there's any like incident happen, they respond immediate manner. So that's typical the division across the life cycle of the development in the medical device manufacturer. So as Janet, also Jean, Dr. Hizo Lee already covered, maybe you are familiar with all the terminology here, SBOM and life cycle, why this is important in the software developments. So medical industry is not the exception that adopting all the open source software. So although we are working for some embedded device, like a surgical robot, we are also preparing a lot of the digital healthcare product as well. So that's why we have some challenge dealing with the complexity of the software. So as Janet already covered that, we had a very bad experience about using Log4j. So when it happened last year, I remember that some of our team inside actually manually digging through all the code base. So where is the Log4j used? So we were surprised at the time. It's very sticky, so it's everywhere. So we spent a hard time to patch all those things, identify and patch everything. So it took so much time to deal with it. So definitely we need some the automated solution to cope with that situation even in the future. So maybe I can just tell you about some pain point in real practice, why we dealing with the SBOM. So what's currently we are missing. So maybe one of the most critical pain point is current process. We are relying on too much manual labor, as I mentioned. So the human engineer just go to the site and also looking at the GitHub or the repository, they scanned everything manual manner. So probably the grab or some like a string match might be one of the easy way to do. But actually they asked to the software engineer, okay, did you use this library, this vulnerable library? And they have to get the confirmation from there. So that's a big no-no, the complex software, the ecosystem. So the second one, across the company, I realized that there are many different programming languages I used. So for example, for system side, especially for robot, C and C++ are major language, but look at the other like a cloud or machine learning based. We also use the Python, Go, the TypeScript, Ruby. There are tons of other languages. So there should be some the unified way to scan those vulnerability, also generating the automated SBOM report, depending on the programming language. So that was another pain point that we had. And there are also typically too many developers, they think this type of scanning as like a one-time activity. So probably they always say, okay, yeah, we are busy with the development schedule. So can you just do it later? So that the typical practice is we go there and then we scan the source code. Then once we come up with some report and then let them know, okay, these are the list of vulnerable libraries we have to patch. Then they kind of, okay, we just right before the release deadline, so that it's extremely difficult to patch everything right before the release. That is the pain point we had. So we were looking at the other solution, what can help and improve our internal process. And then, of course, LabRadar just caught our attention, so that we kind of evaluate. We had the opportunity to evaluate the LabRadar in the last spring. So I just want to share with you with that our the evaluation result with you. So in summary, as Jean just covered in the slide deck, I really like the fine granularity at the scanning phase. So basically, it just come up with 3 different levels of scanning: file level, function level, also library level. So that's definitely we needed. Some other tools, we saw that they can just consume some firmware and then come up with some like SBOM reports but it was just one level. So they can only just get us know that, okay, these are the file utility you are using, but they just stop there. So it didn't just dig more into like a library level. So definitely that's quite different from what we originally thought. And another, the good side of Labrador was the accuracy. So basically we target more than top different open source code base, so that to see whether Labrador can scan these vulnerable libraries in a proper manner. So we measure the precision and recall to see how much it can just lower the first alarm about the scanning procedure. So in most cases, it successfully scanned the major vulnerability that the code base contains. So we really like that. It was very impressive at the time. Also, I'm just repeating, but looking at the report generating capability. So SBOM, SBOM report can be in like SPDX, also Cyclone DX. So it was phenomenal. Also, it was working. It was syncing with the CVE library well, so we can get the immediate the vulnerability information right away. That's another good thing. And also modify the code base scanning. So that's also important because in many practice, engineering team want to just bring the software and then modify it in their manner, so that some tool cannot scan those modified portion, but actually Labrador did it. So we really enjoying to see that it can be supported. Lastly, one of the things, unique things we in our situation. So especially engineering team, also the company want to protect their intellectual property, so IP. So usually for dealing with the system side, they, as I told you, so system side, they are dealing with the C and C++ language, and they don't want to rebuild their code base to the external, so that they want to keep in everything inside the company. But still, they are using some open source software, so it's kind of irony. So to do so, many tools are nowadays supporting only the cloud-based SaaS model, but Labrador also provide on-premises setup. So we can have the Labrador inside of the company and then set up our own development integration. So that's another benefit when I just look at the Labrador. So with that, I can wrap up my the impression on the Labrador. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Yusun Kim, thank you very much for your testimony regarding your use of Labrador. And right now we are going to conclude the presentation section of our webinar. So I would like to thank you, all of you, for the interesting insights regarding SBOM and its importance in the software supply chain management. Right now we are going on to the Q&A session. So we are going to have a look at the question asked by our audience. So give me a second. Okay, so the first few questions are for you, Janet. So one question is, where can I see more of the statistics mentioned in the webinar?
Oh yeah, thanks. So the State of Application Security is a report that Forrester releases every year, and my colleague and I recently released it, and I'll put a link in the channel to post about it so you can learn more.
Okay, thank you very much for letting us know. The second question for you would be, where can I learn more about SCA, software composition analysis?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's, I would say for software composition analysis, we also have a report that we put out on, understanding what the capabilities are, as well as some of the different players in the space. And I'll also put a link to a blog that we have there, so you folks can learn more about it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for sharing that with us. The third question it's to you again. And it would be about sharing some best practices for a successful SBOM management. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So I think the first thing is to understand what's in your supply chain. So first you have to understand all the applications that you have, all of the APIs that you use, all the software that you're combining. And then once you do that, you can make sure that as you're building that software, that you are automating the generation of software bills of material. Because I think, we've heard that, if you do it manually, it's very painful and it can't be done just once. And so if you automate that process by including it in your software development lifecycle, we suggest in the different phases: design, development, testing, and production. And then you have to make sure that you're using your software bill of materials and comparing it to vulnerabilities, so you understand what is out there, and as well as the licenses that you're using. And if you're using a tool like software composition analysis, it can help you do that automatically, and you can set policies for that. And then you'll want to store that software bill of materials with your whatever you're releasing, however you release that software. So maybe you have internal systems where you store, and make sure that you want to make sure that that's protected as well. So you can store that with your application, and then you can provide that to your customers when it is time. If you're a customer, what you're going to want to do is, when you get that software bill of materials, is to understand what's in it, to look at it and assess the components, again, to understand, hopefully you'll get it with a vulnerability report, so you don't have to do that yourself, but also make sure that you store it properly. And so if you have an asset management system, you can store it in that system. We see people are starting to store them in compliance risk systems, GRC systems. And I think Jin mentioned that, people also are creating component repositories. So make sure that you're saving that off, because if you're getting this information from the supplier, you do have a duty to make sure it's protected. So that's my high level tips. Jin, do you want to add anything to that? I know you're passionate about this area.
Yeah, so to be honestly, get leveled into your organization and manage SBOM and vulnerability and license compliance issue automatically. I think that will be the most brilliant answer. And then also, as Janet mentioned, we recommend to adapt SCA solution into design and development and test, and also like operation and maintenance stage, to prevent the security accident, and also save the time and cost of the development life cycle. So yeah, that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much for this extensive answer regarding SBOM management. I also have one comment that says that right now SBOM isn't regulated in Europe yet. So it was asked, then what would you recommend European companies to do, although there is no regulation, what to do for a European company regarding that?
I can start, and then Jen, I'll pass it over to you. So while there isn't hard regulations yet, I think we can assume that likely other governments will follow what the United States has done. The UK actually this year put out a government cyber security strategy. So it's a vision report where what they're looking at is they want to make sure that the nation is secure across not just the government sector, but the public sector as well. And so in it, they give different recommendations that companies should be doing. And as part of it, they do talk about a procurement process and making sure that you're assessing your cyber security requirements as part of that. And so I would imagine that maybe they'll strengthen that. This is more of a vision document, that they'll make that more of a requirement later on. But even though they don't mention a software bill of materials, I think that we can, it's important to understand that this is an artifact that around the world people can use to exchange information. It is, there are the formats that we mentioned are well known. So I would expect that, we'll maybe see more there from the UK. The European Agency for Cybersecurity, ENSA, they put out a really comprehensive report of a lot of the different supply chain attacks that have happened. It is, it's a great document because it also goes through and tells you how the different attacks happen. So it's a really good read. And they also talk about the need for more cybersecurity maturity when talking to your suppliers. So yes, maybe not hard requirements yet, but I think in general, I think all the governments are trying to say it's not just about supplying to us, right? Everybody needs to, if we want to make sure our nation is secure, we need to make sure that all of our software is secure. And so I think that organizations, maybe you're not supplying to a government agency, but you could be a supplier to a supplier again, or a supplier to a supplier. So at some point you may have to fall into these orders, but even if you don't want Log4j to be something that stops your whole organization and requires you to spend days and days of manual time when you don't have to. Having these processes, these good hygiene in place for understanding your software development lifecycle, automating it, making sure that you're checking on it, you're fixing the vulnerabilities, you understand the licenses. This is all really important so that you save time in the long run by making sure you include these upfront.
Okay, thank you very much, Janet, for this information regarding what European companies need to do in order to secure themselves and their software supply chain. I think we have one more question, and this question is for Labrador Labs. So you were asked which vertical/industries does Labrador Labs focus on? So please let us know more about that.
Okay, so I can say that this case, our question also we can understand. So which industry is accepting SBOM and this new regulation? So in both domains, in Korean market and also international market, we are focusing on finance and medical device and medical industry. But for the next step, we are also preparing automotive and various manufacturing industry, because we can assume that eventually it can affect to all industry, not only like medical or finance, because it is really important. When we buy some beverage or some food, we can see what kind of ingredients are in there. That only software, it's just like sell and purchasing without any information regarding the components. What kind of components are in here? So eventually, I think SBOM will be like new normal in the market. So we are now focusing on medical and financial industry, but we'll be targeting all industry.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean, for the answer for this last question, as unfortunately we are out of time. So I would like to thank everyone for your time and interest in our webinar. The questions that haven't been covered yet will be answered via email, and as of now, I wish you all a nice day, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. And we hope to see you soon for our next webinar. So we wish you a pleasant time. Thank you very much all.